Hi everyone, Josh from the Narrate team here. To finish Narrate's series, Simple but Demanding, Adam discusses the topic of managing money by looking to parts of the text that detail stewardship and generosity.
Hey, you guys, it's great to be with you. It's daylight savings, so it's like 12:30. Are you hungry? Is that right? It's 12:30, right? Yeah, okay, I'm right. It's a little late. I don't know, but I'm thinking clearly. So if you're guest list, we're thrilled that you're here. We're in this, just to kind of get us started this morning, I don't know that you've thought of this, but it strikes me that we're at this intersection of seasons on a morning like this. Like we're coming out of this crazy, awesome, chaotic season called back to school, back to work, back to the grind, back to being productive, back to getting the kids in school. Sports are starting to end. Like that whole fall thing, late August, early August, September, October, all that's kind of over. And then this is, it's November 1st. Which makes it, that was a large yawn. I'm sorry, I shouldn't point you out. It makes it the first day of this, you'll never come to church here again. Let me know if you need some recommendations for some good ones. First day of this season that we call the holiday season. And if you haven't already been thinking in that direction, let me help you. When you wake up in the morning, okay, so you ready? When you wake up in the morning, what lies between you and Christmas Eve are 7 minuscule Sundays. How's your blood pressure? And what was the first thought you had? Just curious, because there's one that I need you to have or else the whole sermon is sabotaged. Did it have anything to do with shopping? Like, okay, maybe not. So what I want to do this morning, though, in all seriousness, is we're kind of at our own little intersection ourselves, coming out of this season called Simple but Demanding, but which I gather has been helpful and thought-provoking and grateful for that. And then we're headed into a new one. Next week, our friend Stan Simmons will be here. And if you're not familiar with Stan, there's not a better leader in the whole world, probably the most accomplished church leader in the state of Montana over the last few decades. And in my opinion, the best communicator I've ever had the privilege of knowing personally or hearing in person. Phenomenal. He'll be here. He's been investing in us over the last couple of years. And then that following week, we're going to start a series called Gifting Wonder. And we're going to talk about what is the place of questions and wonder and mystery and even doubt in our relationship with God. We're also going to talk about the value of being that person at Thanksgiving dinner who can ask questions, not just spew forth personal experiences, you know that dynamic. So we're just going to talk about being a people who have the ability to gift wonder and the gift of wonder that God gives us in our relationship with him. So we'll start that on the 15th. This morning, though, I just want to get you thinking about money. And I want to talk a little bit about it, which means you should have went hunting. That's what you're thinking, right? Like, dang, I should have went hunting because we're talking about money. So just let me kind of just clear the air here. If you've never been with us before and we've talked about money, I get it. Like it's the last thing in the world you ever want to have happen at a place like this from a person like me. So let me just offer a few caveats. You get to be the judge of how sincere they are, despite how sincere I might say they are. First of all, I don't want anything from you this morning. I really don't. Jesus talked more about money than any other topic. And I think he does that because he doesn't want something from you, but he wants something for you. And that sounds like preacher talk, and you get to decide whether or not it's true, which means the second part of just before we even get rolling this morning, I'd like to say is if at some point I seem a little slimy, could be because I've been working for 8 hours now and I kind of stink. But if at some point, you're like, I don't know, this seems a little creepy, I'm not sure about your motive, then fine. Don't apply it here. Apply it somewhere else. Do what we're talking about in some other context, because I really believe, even though you might not be a religious person and you don't even follow Jesus, and this is a church and I'm a pastor, if you'll just step back, I think there's some good stuff in what we're going to talk about this morning. And the reason that I want to talk about it this morning, we're conventional, like the churches that I respect and the leaders that I plagiarize, when they say is the best time to talk about money? And we've actually applied this around here. You know when people don't skip church, but they actually come to church, that they don't lean back and get defensive, they actually lean forward. Do you know what the Family Feud, what the survey says? You know what the survey says when you want to talk about money and actually welcome the topic? Not November 1st, that's sabotage. Not December 1st, you know what it is? January 2nd. And listen, you don't even need me to speculate as to why that might be the case. And so my thinking this year is what if rather than reacting come January, What if we were proactive? And listen, I am not anti-Christmas. Like there probably needs to be people who have us ask deeper questions about the way we celebrate Christmas. I'm not your guy. I am so superficial. I love Christmas. I love gifts. It's my love language, or one of them. I love to give them. I like to get them even more. In fact, some of the worst fights my wife and I have ever had has been her inadequate gift purchasing for me on things like Christmas. So listen, I'm not shutting down Christmas. We probably need people to just provoke those conversations. I can't do that for you. But I just want to get us thinking, like, what if we didn't take our hands off the wheel and arrive in January and realize that there's a whole bunch of unfulfilled promises and a lot of misery? What if we could just kind of keep them firmly at, what is that, driver's ed people? Is it 10 and 6? No, 10 and 2? 10 and 6. I think that makes you a gangster or something along those lines, so you could do that as well. 10 and 6. Would you be driving, like, yacht? Like, what would you drive at 10 and 6? You know those rides at theme parks that when you're 5 years old, like, I think, what is that place in Idaho that has the theme park? Silverwood, yeah. It has one. Disneyland has one. Six Flags has one. We have a picture of one. Remember these rides? The antique cars. Now, when you were 6 years old, that was the ride. Why? Why was it the ride? Because you get to drive. And when you're 36 years old, why is it the anti-ride? Like that lady in a drunken stupor in the back seat of her daughter's I don't know, what is she doing there? I'm not quite entirely sure. Anyway, because you're not driving, right? Like, it's a facade. There are these bumpers. There's this metal rail between your axle and these two rubber booties, and you're driving about 18 inches right and left, but it is predetermined. That's the picture in my head this week. What if we kept our hands on the wheel in this season? And what would it look like? Now, this is church, and I'm that guy, and so you already know the sermon, right? Because you've heard it 10,000 times before, whether at church or from your grandparents or whatever. The sermon is, money can't make you happy, right? Here's my commitment to you. The conclusion of this morning's message, which I am indebted to Andy Sandley and others in my plagiarizing expertise for, is not money can't make you happy, because I actually don't believe it. And I don't think you probably do either. Like, I know that when guys like me stand up here and you go like, okay, so money can't make you happy, right? You all go, uh-huh. And deep in your heart, what are you thinking? Try me. Like, I would love to sign up for that experiment. Like, it seems like a no-lose proposition, doesn't it? And I wonder if part of the reason why we kind of are hesitant about that is, what if there is a connection between money and happiness? But what if where we go wrong is we think it's this word more? And I think maybe one of the places to start in this conversation, especially in this season where more is the driving force of the whole season, is maybe we just need to stop. Maybe one of the best things you can do in the conversations that you're having with those that you love is just go like, okay, so how much more? How many other rungs up the organizational ladder? How many more zeros in the salary? If what you believe is more money will make you more happy, then wouldn't it be smart to know what that amount is? Like, how much more? What is it? I think we need to think about this. And some of you, you're a sophisticated bunch. You may even go like, well, it's not about happiness, it's about peace. Okay. How much more money is it going to take for you to feel peace in your finances? Many of you are entrepreneurs and organizational leaders, and it's all wrapped into one, right? So how big does the organization need to get? How many clients before you can stop stressing and actually be present at home? Like, how much? How much notoriety? How high up the organizational chart? How much gross revenue in the organization? How many houses? How many loans? How big? How much? Because the answer for all of us, and this is where it gets crazy, and again, we know this stuff, but isn't the answer for all of us, whether you have much or little or somewhere in between, no matter what you drive or where you live or how you recreate, isn't the answer the same for all of us? It sounds something like more than I currently have. And I guess here's the question and the observation that when I heard it, I was like, that is so accurate to the way I understand God in the text. What if the word isn't more? What if the right word is manage? Like, what if what goes in that gap, in the connection between your money and your happiness, isn't more, but manage? What if it's not about how much you make, but how you manage how much you make? And listen, if you're 20 or 30 something, I get it. I'm there with you. This is so hard to believe. And you know what? The people who I sit across the table from a few times a month who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, and some of whom are thriving, and some of whom are dealing with a devastated marriage, you know what those in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, you know what they're saying? I wish I'd have believed it. I wish I would have understood that I want is better than I owe, that there's no end in sight. So listen, sermon's almost over for most of you. What if the challenge for you is not to learn any new things, but to hold tightly to some old things you already know? Well, what if you've got this incredible responsibility to steer the way your family thinks about Christmas, perhaps, to not just throw it out and spend 10 months recovering from? And for those of you who maybe you are some who you've just never even thought in these categories, we would love to serve you. I would love to sit down with you and have coffee and whatever you want to do and talk through this stuff. Now, I know that's creepy and maybe too vulnerable, so someone from the staff would love to do that, and you're going, that's too creepy too. I have friends. I even had someone approach me after last gathering, like, I am an expert in some of this stuff. I would love to meet with anybody. I'll connect you with people. You're still too vulnerable. They'll wear a ski mask. The issue here, you guys, is entropy. That if the system's broken, you need new ideas. And maybe for you, maybe you're not among those who just like, okay, I just need to apply what I know. Maybe you need some new inputs. Wasn't that the most painless message on money you've ever heard? Now, I want to talk to those of you who follow Jesus. For those of you who, coming out of this simple but demanding, you go, okay, God, I understand you don't want anything from me. This isn't about appeasing your wrath. The cross has already dealt with that. I understand that you're telling me stop looking up and start looking out. Start defining your relationship, our relationship, you and God, with how you treat people. I want to talk to those of you who follow Jesus. I don't have any shots to pull. You may never come to church here again. You, along with the person who yawned, you could figure out where you're going to go next weekend. Here's my one question, you guys. Is it possible to, on the one hand, say, the driving force of my life is loving God by loving people, while at the same time not having that reflected, present in the way you manage your money? Like, is that even possible? And again, if you get creeped out, then don't do it here. Apply it to dogs getting spayed and neutered or something like that. But apply it somewhere. That was supposed to be funny, and you just like, that was weird. Just apply it somewhere. Years ago, when I was going to grad school, and I know I start too many stories that way, but if you're a guest with us, there were these 3 years where I got to go to school in Portland, and we went down once a semester for about 10 days, and it was a course on leadership. And for me, it was a double course on leadership because I got to go with my friend Brian Hopkins, who leads Journey in Bozeman, and he was at the time and still is one of the best organizational leaders I've ever known. And so I got to spend all this time with him. We roomed together. We did everything together. And we were in this cohort. There were 16 or 17 of us who took every credit. That was a unique part of our experience at the time. And one of the guys in the group was a guy named Petey. Petey lived in Corvallis, Oregon. He did college ministry at Oregon State. And he was that Portland guy, you know, that hipster guy with the tattoos and the hats and the gear and the stickers on the back of his MacBook Pro. I mean, he was Captain Cool. And then the second year we came back, and in the fall when we came back for the first time, what we all learned was that Petey the hipster had taken a job at this church in downtown Dallas, this historic Presbyterian church that was just very affluent, very historic. Think big hats, no cattle, like just this really kind of posh place. And he was telling us a story in class. I don't remember the why he was telling it. But he said that a few weeks prior to his being down with us, his church, he had learned via his senior pastor, that just a handful of months into their budget year was $2 million short on their annual budget. They'd bled $2 million since the start of their budget year. It must have started in June or something like that. Now, at the time, I didn't understand organizations and money. I was a youth pastor who spent it, not anyone who had to manage it or raise, none of those things. And I'm listening to him tell this story. And as he continued, he said, so that happened on a Sunday. So they were $2 million short. The pastor told the staff that, fuzzy in my brain. That following Sunday, the pastor stood in front of their church and told them, we're short. But he didn't tell him 2 million. He just said, like, just want you to know, nothing manipulative, just want you to know we're short and it's fairly dramatic, and just so you know in your conversations with the Lord. The following Tuesday, his pastor was sitting in his office, and a guy walked in by the name of Dana Carvey. It wasn't actually Dana Carvey, it was Ross Perot. You see that? Remember that? Now, if you grew up in the 90s, you know who Ross Perot is. Otherwise, you're like, who's Ross Perot? Ross Perot was this gazillionaire guy who ran for presidency during the Clinton-Bush era of running for presidency. Ross Perot walked into his office. He went to church there. That was his place. He sat down across the desk from this pastor. He pulled his checkbook out of his back pocket, a pen from his shirt pocket. He looked at the pastor and he said, "How much are we short?" Now, they were over 2 million short. And I'm listening to this going, oh man, I'm learning leadership right now. And Petey, I couldn't believe, Petey said his pastor, he looked at Ross Perot. I mean, I'm thinking like this church leadership thing, like this is easy. Like God just like when you're 2 million short, he just sends people in the door and they just write checks for that amount. Like this is awesome. His pastor looked at him and you know what he said? He said, "I'm not telling you how much we're short. I want you to give what God's talked to you about what to give. I want you to give in a way that's reflected in your everyday management of what God has given you." And that's that. And I'm sitting there like, my daddy called that guy a fool. Like, what in the world is he thinking? Like, the whole deficit just gone. Like, boom, adios. I was just convinced, like, I'm getting a crash course on how not to lead your church's finances. And my friend Brian, who I have so much respect for, still. I'm sitting between him and Petey. We're in this long row of tables in the back of the classroom. Brian sticks his hand over my head and high fives Petey above my head. And I'm like, I'm so confused. Certainly he was just being gracious. It would have been hours later before I got the chance to finally ask Brian. I was like, "Brian, seriously, like you must have just been being kind, right? Like that guy isn't, no." And he's like, "No, Adam, that was great leadership." "What do you mean that was great leadership?" He said, "If what we're talking about is Ross Perot's soul." Now listen, I know we're picking on him. We don't know what his weekly, regular giving habits are. But for the sake of exercise, Adam, if we're talking about Ross Perot's soul, that was the best thing he could have done for him. That would be devastating to his own understanding of God and local church if he got to walk out the door going, "I made this thing happen." And simultaneously, he said, that would have been devastating for that church. Now, I don't tell you that story because we have a $2 million budget shortfall, by the way. That would mean that we've never taken an offering in the history of Narrate. That's not why I'm telling you the story. But I do think it provokes us to think about giving in the way we manage, in ways that are uncomfortable for us. And the word that comes to mind for me is impulse. That if we're not careful, if we think about giving in ways that are reflected by the way we buy candy bars in the checkout line at the grocery store, that we think, oh yeah, when an opportunity comes. And I guess this morning I want to get you thinking about, what if that's not the way God thinks about giving? What if when God said to a farmer, "Hey, when you cut your field, leave the corners." Why leave the corners? Because there's a guy a few counties over and it didn't rain in his part of the county and he doesn't get a harvest this year, so he can come harvest your corners. What if that God who says, oh yeah, in the first, some would say as high as 21% of what you harvest, that goes to these various things that involve your local synagogue and temple and all of that. What if that's the way God invites us to think about this? You know, I had this moment a couple weeks ago that was for me a high point of these last 6 years. We had a council meeting on a Thursday night. And on the agenda for that council meeting was this thing that we talked about on Vision Weekend that we've had a lot of positive feedback from. And it involved our desire to come alongside classroom teachers and go, how do we serve you as you serve the working poor? Like it's something, we're aware that we're not as involved in that area of the community as we would like to be. We also recognize that serving working poor people in a welfare state is really complicated. And so we had this idea that we're just shooting a bullet at this year of going like, what if via classroom teachers we could serve these kids? Because they're best positioned to identify them and know what they need. Well, it was on our agenda that night because, quite honestly, since Vision Weekend, we'd had zero movement on it. Lots of conversations with classroom teachers, but no one's taken us up on it. And so I was getting a little antsy, and I put it on the agenda, and I had a suggestion to the guys about like how we could push this thing forward. And that led to this incredible conversation because they were going like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. And we ultimately left the meeting going, let's just come up alongside teachers again and just kind of nudge them. Because listen, vision takes time and energy, and that's something that few of us have in abundance, and it's something classroom teachers don't have. Like, it takes time to think about, how would I serve these kids? Get that. So that's the context. Friday, I got back from my lunch, and Sarah, who oftentimes lacks exuberance, she stuck her head in my office and she said, hey, did you see that email? I was like, no, but thanks. And I look at this email. This is the next day, like not 24 hours later. And I've got an email from a teacher who teaches at one of our middle schools and specializes in emotionally disturbed kids. And she was explaining in the email that due to some kind of policy shifting, and she wasn't, for better or for worse, whatever, that wasn't really her interest, her ability to tend to these kids' emotional needs just wasn't happening anymore. They didn't have time for it. And then she'd been like aggravated by that and really wrestling with that. And then she said, but I got an idea. And my idea is, and she had already talked to her coworker who works in this, already talked to the home ec teacher about hosting it. Her idea was to host a breakfast every Friday for all of the kids on her client list, if you will, in order to create a space where these kids could start their day with a good breakfast, but more than that, where they could come alongside them and tend to needs that were other than academic. And her question was, do you think that falls within what Narrate's wanting to do there? To buy that food? And I'm like, does it? Yeah, I mean, so I send back this email like, yes, this is awesome and this is incredible. And I'm not that guy who's like, wow, this is weird and God and blah, blah. Like, it's not that I don't believe in God, but I'm a little hesitant to go like God thing. And nonetheless, I text her because she's also a friend. And I was like, you have no idea what happened. And I just explained to her the whole, like, we just talked about this at council the night before and you wouldn't believe this. And she said, I woke up in the middle of the night and there I had the idea. Now, my point is simply this. Our ability to serve kids in that fashion, it's not because of impulse. It's because some of you for years now have so bought into the vision of this place that you go like, yeah, we're going to pool resources. We're going to collaborate not just on energy and time, but on resources. And what I love about the leadership of your council is it's not them going, well, when an idea comes along, we'll find the money. It's them going, no, we're going to budget. We're going to manage our stuff, assuming God's going to give us the chance to serve people in certain ways. What if it's just frankly silly to think that our life is about loving God by loving people if that's not reflected in our stuff? And again, don't apply it here if that's the issue. Paul said something to Timothy. It seems that Paul was nearing the end of his life. He knew that his opportunity to speak to groups of people about Jesus were coming to an end. And so he wrote this letter called 1 Timothy. And he said something to them that I just want to look at. Because over and over and over again, what you see in the text is not just give, but have a plan for that. Listen to what he says. Command those who are rich in this present world. Okay, let's just stop there. What's broken about that statement? I mean, with all due respect to Paul and Timothy and the Holy Spirit and God and everything that could squash me like a bug, what was wrong with that statement? Well, let me put it this way. If Timothy stood up and said, okay, now, got a message for everybody who's rich in this world, what is everyone in the room's response? Wonder who that is. I think, isn't the problem with this statement that we nobody thinks of, like, let me put it this way. If we said, okay, so tonight at 5 p.m., we're going to have a little meeting at 3:12 for all those of you who are rich in this world. Who's showing up to that meeting? Me. Nobody's showing up to that meeting. Why? Because rich is a relative term, and we've talked about this in the past, that it's a moving target. That the problem is we graduate high school and sometimes before, and we're in pursuit of this thing called rich. We're in pursuit of this thing called like happy because of my money. We're in pursuit of this thing called financial peace. The problem is we've not defined where that is and what that looks like and how much that involves. And therefore it raises the risk of we cross over from not rich to rich, but we don't know that we've crossed over. See, I wonder if Paul's problem was really any different than our problem, that when he said, hey, let's talk to the rich people, they all went like, problem is there's none around here. And it exposes this question of what is rich? Gallup did a survey years ago. They asked people who made $34,000 or less a year, their family unit, how much money would you need to make to be rich? You know what the number was, the average number? $70,000 a year. They said if our family made $70,000 a year, we'd be rich. And some of you make $70,000 a year and you're going, that's naive. Like, do you have any idea how much a cell phone is? And do you know how much it is, like an IRA and car insurance? And and I drive a 1996 Subaru. Like, you don't have any idea what rich is. So then they asked people who made between $34,000 and $70,000 a year, how much money would you need to make to be rich? You know what the answer was? $100,000. If my family brought home $100,000 a year, we'd be rich. And if you make $100,000 a year, you go, well, yeah, but you didn't account for braces and broken bones and sending your kids off to college. And do you have any idea how expensive it is to have your kids involved in activities, and on and on and on and on? So then they took all the numbers and they averaged them. You know what the average number was? $120,000 a year. Now, here's an exercise. If 20-year-old you knew what you make today, what would 20-year-old you have said of your status? Then they took the country's largest income earners, and they asked them, how much money do you need to make to be rich? And you know what they said? They said $5 million in liquid assets so that could sit in an account and I could live off $200,000 a year, then I'd be rich. And you're going, well, I guess so. Like, I think you would be at that point. My point is this, and I'm not trying to pick on richness. In fact, I think there's something humanizing to the fact that Paul addresses them. The point is simply this: we oftentimes pursue a target that's undefined, and therefore we've crossed over it, and we make all kinds of allowances to our approach to life because we're not there yet. You know, if you make $37,000 a year on a global level, if your family brings in $37,000 a year, did you know that puts you in the top 4% of people on the planet? Now, I know there's cultural stuff, and I get that. But 7 billion people, $37,000 a year, and you're among the elite of the elite. If you make $45,000 a year, you're among the top 1% on the planet. My point is simply this: if we miss that perhaps we're already rich and that all the problems we have might be rich person problems, because it seems to me that as Americans, we're rich. Like I don't have an iPhone, I have an Android. That's a rich person problem, right? I don't have a new car, I've got a 20-year-old car. Rich person problem. Braces, rich person problem. Do you know how much it costs to have a baby? Rich person problem. Childcare, college, they're rich person problems. What if what happens is we give ourselves an out? And God goes, don't do that. Listen to what Paul, here's ultimately his message for them. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. Here's my question. Does that sound to you like spontaneous and impulsive is the approach, or managed and planned? John Maxwell just released some new work, and in it he tells a story about a book he was given in his 30s. The title of the book was The Greatest Story Ever Told. Now, he's a book nerd like lots of you. He was really excited to read it. When he finally opened it up, he was a little bit horrified to see that every page in the book was blank, save what the person who had given the book to him had written on the first page, and it said this: your life is before you. Fill these pages with kind acts, matters of your heart, wonderful deeds. Write your own story of significance. Listen, I know you're going at him. You don't do it here. But over and over and over again, the invitation of God, you can spin it a couple ways. But people who understand what it means to leverage giving will tell you it's the most tangible thing they get to do. What would it look like if it was part of your plan, not your spontaneity? Like what would happen if you built that in? And you know what I love about the text? Dallas Willard, I heard recently in an interview where he was asked, what's the most important thing about Jesus? And he said the most important thing about Jesus is the value he gives to humanity. What I love about God's giving system is how different it is from the American tax system. And listen, I'm not trying to be political. I'm too naive to be political. The American tax system says you only get to contribute to the common good if you make this much. And God's system has always said it's not about amounts, it's about percentages. You get to contribute no matter how much or how little you have. You'll bump into a story of this nativity this Christmas season about a time when Jesus' parents, when he was 8 days old, took him to the temple. And they fulfilled an ancient Jewish consecration ceremony which involved their offering something. But what you see in the story is they offered, and Luke's not clear, he says 2 young pigeons or 2 young doves. And he asks the question, like, well, why young pigeons or young doves? Well, if you go back to the book of Leviticus, you'll see that when this thing was put together by God, the offering was supposed to be a sheep. And then it says, but if you couldn't afford a sheep, then bring doves. And if you can't afford doves, bring a pigeon. What I love about the way God thinks about this stuff is it's not a system where we say, let's let the rich people carry us. It's a system that says, let's change everyone's heart by letting everyone contribute. Listen, I understand you're in 8th grade. You shovel a sidewalk or mow a lawn every once in a while. I'm telling you and challenging you. If you have a system where you give off that job, that insignificant grocery store job, that whatever, then you will leverage what you have years later. And if you choose that your amount is insignificance now, it only gets more difficult. And the pull of more is better only gets stronger. Now, I'd like to level with you. There's no denying. Narrate is unapologetically built on a very simple premise. And that premise is that people would so buy into the vision of gathering and scattering, so buy into the vision of creating gatherings that unchurched and church people enjoy attending, and so buys into the vision of scattering together that they will build that into their financial management. That's this truth. And the degree to which we do that is directly related to people's buying in and continuing to buy in and buying in for the first time. And you know what else isn't lost on me? It's a whole lot more exciting to support a church that's starting up. It just is. When the narrative is, they're barely making it, and oh man, I can't wait to support this thing. That is so much easier. And to support a church that by all appearances has arrived, whatever that means, and doesn't need our money, it's a completely different story. I get that. And yet, what we've said is the win for us is to create experiences that respect people who don't like these types of experiences. Have you ever noticed that when you get to someone's house, you can tell when you walk in whether or not they were expecting guests? You can tell. And there's no denying that our being a church that wants to invite guests, it's an expensive model. That there's lots of things like videos that you could argue aren't necessities. There's lots of ways to do church with saltine crackers as the communion, and I'm not disparaging that. But what we've said from day one is that the purpose for which God has us is to re-engage people who are disillusioned and disenchanted, and that takes resource. As does raking leaves, as does splitting firewood. It's as does having this kids team that has an intern that's serving kids. So listen, you can apply it here. You can apply it somewhere else. But I challenge you to think about the connection between your stuff.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.